David, weighing 325 pounds, and Emily, who had lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about David's health. As a result, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, David shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 pounds, but after losing 118 pounds, he began contemplating quitting. The journey had been exhausting after all. When David expressed his desire to stop, Emily adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If David quit, their intimacy would remain limited to 4 times a year, and Emily threatened to seek fulfillment elsewhere to meet her needs. In the moments following her threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when David's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked further when she saw the sadness and hurt in his eyes, the result of her words. The foundation of their marriage crumbled as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Emily immediately realized she had made a critical mistake. She had pushed her husband to his limits for her weight loss desires, only to threaten infidelity as punishment. She started questioning her actions, recognizing the impact on David. He expressed his frustration, pointing out the tremendous effort he had put into losing over 100 pounds for her sake. He accused her of using their closeness as a tool to manipulate him, showing his disappointment that his reward had been more deprivation and a threat of infidelity. David believed Emily had jeopardized their marriage, throwing chaos into their home. He began questioning her trustworthiness and wondered if she'd had thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, David felt Emily had damaged their marriage, leaving him uncertain of what to believe. Emily expressed regret, insisting she never intended to cheat. Despite her plea, David, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation and, a few minutes later, left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to think. In the garage, David declared he needed time to reflect, leaving Emily in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt she had planted in David's mind, and understood how hard it would be to undo it. Reflecting on her actions, Emily admitted to herself that she hadn't considered David's feelings. She recognized her greed and desire for more, despite all of David's previous efforts. Now, she knew she needed to work to regain what she had lost. David spent about an hour in the garage, keeping his hands busy while he thought over the complexity of the situation. He didn't really believe his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but after her comment, he wasn't sure anymore. Earlier that day, he would have been certain, but now he couldn't be. He also didn't know if she might cheat in the future. Before, he would never have thought so, but now everything felt uncertain. He said out loud, "I need to find out." David walked back into the house. Emily remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed, her eyes red and her nose swollen from crying. David observed her condition, feeling a twinge of regret, yet he stayed firm in his decision. He told Emily that he was done with the diet and informed her that he would limit their physical moments to the agreed-upon 4 times a year, or possibly none at all, leaving the choice to her. David warned her of severe consequences if she chose to engage with someone else, stating his intent to inflict physical damage on any potential lover. David sternly told Emily that any infidelity on her part would immediately end their relationship. He emphasized that he would not stay married to a cheater, referring to her as a fancy woman and making clear his zero tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared that he no longer trusted her and announced his intention to keep a close eye on her actions, cautioning her to be extremely careful. Before he left, David mentioned that he would be gone for a while and would miss lunch but assured her he'd return for dinner. He suggested she order food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving an atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty. David grabbed his car keys from the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Emily heard the garage door open and the sound of his car driving away. Once he was gone, Emily whispered, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and stayed at the kitchen table, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then collapsed on the bed and cried some more. When David arrived home that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like many husbands who suspect their wives of cheating, David decided to do some detective work on his own. He figured the best place to start was by driving to the telephone provider to request a printout of call logs from their home phone and Emily's cell. Both were in his name, so he knew there would be no issue getting the reports. The landline company told him he could get it electronically, and they uploaded the call logs from the past 3 years onto a CD for a small fee. He gladly paid and walked out of the office with everything he needed. Yes, David requested 3 years' worth of data because he wanted to look back before he started his diet, to see if there had been any underlying reason for Emily cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company to request the same data. They hesitated at first since he was asking for his wife's cell phone records, but David reminded them that it was a joint account, and his name was clearly on the records. With that, they had no valid reason to withhold the information. They offered the data electronically for a fee of $20. David thought it was a bit excessive but worth it for the convenience of accessing the information. He made a mental note that he might rethink his choice of cell phone provider in the future. When he got home around 4 p.m., David saw Emily lying on their bed, fast asleep. Deciding not to wake her, he headed to their home office, locking the door so he wouldn't be disturbed. He sat at the computer and downloaded all the data from the 2 CDs into a folder on his computer. David already had a plan in mind for how he would conduct his search. He decided to start with the calls from 2 years ago and compile a list of every phone number that had been called during the first month of his diet, the month when Emily had limited their intimacy to just 4 times a year, with rewards tied to his progress. That would have been September 2008 on their home phone. He found that there had been 96 calls that month to 19 different numbers. Thankfully, the format provided by the phone company allowed him to sort the data in various ways. So, he created a list of calls by phone number, noting the date, time, and duration of each call. Once David got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create a list of every call made from their home phone over the past 2 years. He was just about to start analyzing Emily's cell phone data when he heard the doorknob rattle. The office door was locked, so no one could come in. David quickly saved his work and hid any evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went to open the door, only to be greeted by a pitiful sight. Emily standing there, looking completely disheveled. Her hair was a mess, and her eyes and nose were red from crying. She stood there with her head bent down, only reluctantly looking up into David's eyes. Emily expressed deep remorse, acknowledging the hurt and anger she had caused. She admitted that her actions had been selfish and cruel, interfering with his progress on the diet. Emily apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and admitting that the decision to continue his diet should have been his alone. Despite her overwhelming emotions, she pleaded with David to forgive her. David told her he forgave her but emphasized that his forgiveness was based only on the information he had at that moment. He reminded her of the love he still had for her and the sacrifices he made during the 2-year journey, including giving up their intimacy, all for her sake. But he also admitted that he had reached his breaking point and couldn't continue as things were. David addressed the elephant in the room, the uncertainty about whether Emily had cheated on him. He explained that not knowing the truth would drive him crazy and made it clear that they couldn't move forward until this issue was resolved. David told her that if she hadn't cheated in the past and didn't plan to cheat in the future, they could be okay. But he needed to be sure. He held her accountable for creating this mess with her reckless comment, expressing disbelief at how little she had considered his feelings and the damage she had caused. David told her she would have to deal with the consequences until he could feel confident in their relationship again. Emily had been hoping David would just forgive and forget, but that wasn't going to happen. She thought to herself, I suppose I deserve everything that's happening to me, but I just wish it would all go away. She nodded her head slowly in resignation and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. She lay on the bed again, not sobbing, but with tears still streaking her face. David opened the bedroom door and asked, Emily, "Do you want something to eat?" Emily replied, "No, David. I'm not hungry." David then walked out to his car and drove to a nearby place called Grisham's. It was a spot he and Emily had often gone for drinks, and their food was excellent. Tonight, he was planning to treat himself. He knew he would have a few beers and indulge in a greasy, delicious bacon cheeseburger. Over the past 2 years, he hadn't had more than 2 beers in a week, and he hadn't touched a bacon cheeseburger. But tonight, he was going to allow himself to enjoy it, even though his heart was breaking. When David got home, he went back to the office and resumed working on Emily's cell phone log. Since he already knew the process, it took him half the time to complete the list. After reviewing both lists, David determined that over the course of 2 years, there had been a total of 3,482 calls made from 45 different numbers. He sorted the calls by number and found some surprising results. There had been nearly 300 calls to his cell phone, around 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar amount to Emily's parents' number. There were nearly as many calls to each of Emily's sisters, and about half that number to David's brother Michael. Additionally, there were several calls to friends whose numbers David recognized, along with a few to numbers that were unfamiliar to him. As he continued going through the list, he noticed that there were over 200 calls to one number he didn't recognize, and more than 50 calls to another unfamiliar number. He also found around 30 additional calls to other numbers spread out over 2 years. David assumed those were likely to places like hair salons, stores, or church, so he wasn't too concerned about them. He noted them, but quickly turned his attention back to the 2 main numbers he couldn't identify. Being the type of guy David was, he decided to dig deeper and sort the calls by day and time. What he found next sent a chill through him, and suspicion and anger began to boil up inside him. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., David attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant that had meeting rooms. The meeting lasted about an hour, followed by a 1-hour lunch break, with everything wrapping up by 2:30 or 3 p.m. Every single Wednesday at 10:55 a.m., there was a call to his cell phone from Emily. Sure, some weeks were missed, but David immediately realized those were the weeks when he had been on vacation. The pattern was unmistakable. Every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m., without fail, she called him, and every Wednesday at 11:05 a.m., there was a call from their home phone to the first of the 2 unrecognized numbers. David was burning up now. It was too much of a coincidence for him not to be suspicious. He knew, deep down, that whatever he was about to uncover wouldn't bring him any comfort. He looked at the second number and quickly realized that calls to that number were made consistently on Fridays. Once a month on Friday afternoons, David played golf with his brother and some friends, usually finishing their round around 5:30 p.m. They would grab a couple of drinks at the clubhouse before heading home, with David usually arriving back by 6:30 p.m. On those Fridays, Emily would always call him just before his tea time to tell him she loved him and would be waiting for him when he got home. Now, the whole thing felt like a bitter joke. David realized what was happening, but he lacked visual proof or the name of the person Emily was seeing. The unsettling part was trying to figure out how long it had been going on. Was it only after Emily had cut him off, or did it start even earlier? Extending his investigation, David looked back another year and discovered that the same pattern of calls had been happening for 3 months before the intimacy restrictions were put in place. So whatever Emily had been doing, she'd started 3 months earlier, though not as frequently. Now, all David needed to do was figure out who this other person was and then decide what to do about it. Finding out who it was turned out to be easier than he thought. David did a reverse lookup on the first number and found that it was a cell phone, not listed in any directory. When he ran the second number, it came back as being registered to a Lucas Romano. And of course, David knew exactly who Lucas was. He was the trainer at the gym Emily had found for David. So, Emily had been calling Lucas on the Fridays when David was out golfing. David noted Lucas's address in his spreadsheet and decided to head out for a while. He went back to Grisham's for a couple more beers. After the dinner rush died down, he approached the attractive bartender, Rachel, and explained his situation briefly. He asked her for a favor, to call the first number on his behalf and ask for Lucas. The plan was simple. Rachel would say a woman had given her Lucas's number as a potential trainer, and if Lucas answered, she could confirm it was him. Then she would inquire about his availability, pretending to be interested in hiring him as her trainer. Rachel agreed and took David's phone. She dialed the number and asked if the person on the other end was Lucas. She then introduced herself as Jennifer, a woman who had been recommended Lucas's services by someone at her hair salon. Rachel, acting as Jennifer, explained that she was 24 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, and weighed around 130 pounds, though she was hoping to slim down to about 115. She complimented Lucas's reputation and asked if he had any openings available. Lucas, thinking he had a potential new client, told her that one of his clients had just quit, so he had room for a new trainee. Jennifer expressed her interest and said she would stop by the gym in the next few days to meet him in person. David sat there in amazement at how easily Rachel had managed to confirm everything. Not only had she verified that it was Lucas from the gym, but she also confirmed that Lucas liked to flirt with his female clients. Rachel had even found out that Lucas had an opening because someone had dropped out. Likely David himself. It hit David like a punch in the gut. Emily must have already warned Lucas about what had happened and told him to be extra cautious. As David sat there, feeling lower than dirt, he couldn't help but find some humor in what Rachel had said during the call. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed, but he knew one thing for sure. She was stunning just as she was. She didn't need to lose a single pound. Smiling, David looked at her and said, "You're hilarious, Rachel. You're perfect just the way you are. You better stay far away from Lucas, because no one has a more perfect body than you do." Rachel responded to David's compliment with a radiant smile, thanking him and calling him a kind gentleman. She even went on to compliment him, saying he was quite the hunk and admitting she didn't understand why his wife would ever seek companionship elsewhere. David returned her smile and acknowledged her words. He admitted that 2 years ago, he might not have been considered a hunk, but he quickly pointed out that it didn't excuse his wife's actions. He thanked Rachel for both helping him gather information on Lucas and for giving his bruised ego a much-needed boost. David expressed his gratitude once again and mentioned it was time for him to head home. He thanked Rachel for her support and understanding one more time before leaving. Once home, David noticed it was late, so he went straight to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked over at Emily and was overwhelmed with a sense of loss and disappointment. He realized he had never felt this low in his life, but deep down, he knew that before this ordeal was over, he might feel even worse. Emily stirred slightly as he settled into bed and softly said, "I love you, David." He just grunted in response, turned his back to her, and tried to fall asleep. Sleep didn't come easily, though, and he lay awake for a while, lost in his thoughts. At one point, he was sure he heard a quiet sob from Emily, but she seemed to calm down shortly after. The next morning, David woke up to find Emily spooned up against him, her body pressed into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around, placed her hand on him, and apologized for the hurtful things she had said, asking for closeness. David, aware of how vulnerable he felt in that moment, resisted the temptation. He gently reminded her that he had to get going and reiterated the boundaries he had set. He firmly told Emily that this kind of behavior shouldn't be repeated. After getting out of bed, David showered and headed to work. Left alone, Emily muttered to herself, acknowledging that she deserved the consequences of her actions and the emotional pain that came with them. At work, David confided in his boss about the troubles he was facing at home, briefly explaining the situation. His boss was supportive, advising David to take whatever time he needed to deal with his suspicions. Additionally, his boss gave him the name of a reliable electronics distributor that specialized in surveillance equipment. Grateful, David informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday to handle things at home. His boss, understanding David's intentions, wished him good luck with a knowing smile. David went to the electronics distributor, where he discovered that his boss had already called ahead, instructing the staff to provide him with whatever he needed. Visual proof seemed difficult to obtain, but David felt confident about recording audio. He purchased 3 top-of-the-line bugs, each with enough battery life to capture several hours of activity. They would transmit data within a couple of city blocks, allowing David to download the information when needed. When David got home, he was greeted by the sight of a special dinner waiting for him, his favorite lasagna, along with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Emily for the thoughtful meal but excused himself to watch some TV. Emily cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the living room, making sure not to push too close at bedtime. She eventually went to the bedroom, giving David the perfect opportunity to plant one of the bugs in their home phone. This would ensure he could record every conversation on the phone, hearing both sides clearly. Although he was nervous about tampering with Emily's cell phone, David decided to go ahead with it. It only took him a few minutes to install the bug, and now he had access to information from both phones. His next challenge was figuring out how to plant a bug on Lucas's phone. David knew there was a chance Emily could use a different phone, maybe even a payphone, to contact Lucas, so he needed to cover all his bases. He also suspected that Lucas might be working with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings, and he saw an opportunity to plant the bug while Lucas was distracted. David headed to the gym and spotted Lucas's phone sitting on a towel about 10 feet away from where Lucas was working with the blonde. It would be risky, but David thought, what do I have to lose? He sneaked in, grabbed the phone, and slipped it into his pocket before quietly backing out of the gym and heading into the men's room. There, he quickly inserted the bug into Lucas's phone. The real challenge would be returning the phone without being seen. When he returned to the gym, he noticed Lucas was finishing up with the blonde. There was no way David could make it to the towel and back without being noticed. Damn, he thought, how am I going to pull this off? After a moment of hesitation, he decided to slide the phone across the floor, hoping to get it close enough to the towel without raising suspicion. It was a risky move, but he went ahead and slid the phone. It made a little noise, but Lucas, still preoccupied with the blonde, didn't notice. Luckily, the phone hit the towel and slid underneath, landing perfectly. David felt confident Lucas wouldn't suspect anything, so he quickly left the gym. At exactly 10:55 a.m., David's cell phone rang. It was Emily, calling to check in before his supposed meeting. David, of course, didn't tell her that he was off work for the rest of the week or that he had skipped the meeting altogether. After a brief 10-minute chat, David started monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Soon after, Lucas's phone rang, and he answered quickly. David listened as Lucas greeted Emily, asking if she wanted to meet at his house like they usually did. Emily, sounding cautious, replied that David was getting suspicious and that they might need to stop meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Lucas grumbled, clearly unhappy with the idea of giving up their encounters. David groaned in disgust as he listened to Emily's response. Acknowledging the risks, Emily admitted that the first time they had been together, she knew she'd do anything to keep seeing him. She had cut David off initially so she could enjoy her time with Lucas more freely. Even though she said she loved David, she couldn't take the chance of being caught now. She suggested that they could resume their weekly meetings in a few weeks, but for now, Lucas would have to make do with one of his other girlfriends. Emily wasn't jealous of Lucas's other relationships and even proposed that they could meet up on Fridays when David went golfing. She needed time to think it over but promised to let Lucas know if it could work. David had heard enough. He felt sick with rage and heartbreak, furious that Emily had been with Lucas from the start, using the diet as a cover to spend more time with him. For the past 2.5 years, Emily had been seeing Lucas every Wednesday and on the Fridays when David was golfing, totaling over 100 secret encounters. David couldn't fathom how she could claim to love him while betraying him so thoroughly. He wondered if there were other men involved, but even Lucas alone was enough for him to want revenge. Over the next 2 days, David carefully crafted a plan, making sure everything was in place for the weekend. As he monitored the phone taps, he heard Emily arrange a hair appointment for Friday morning in a call with her beautician, Janine. During the call, Emily explained that she wanted a new, sexier hairstyle to distract David from his growing suspicions about her infidelity. She also mentioned planning to buy provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Lucas, Emily admitted she might see him less for now, but she laughed, saying it wouldn't be permanent. David was devastated by her laughter, yet the anger that had taken root in him began to drive him forward, pushing the hurt deep down. On Friday, Lucas called Emily, proposing a quick rendezvous. She expressed her intense desire to see him but explained that David was suspicious, asking Lucas to be patient until things calmed down. Every time David overheard these conversations, his heartbreak grew deeper, and he found it impossible to see any love left in their relationship. All he saw was Emily's selfishness and lack of respect for him. By Saturday, David was determined to carry out his revenge. After lunch, the doorbell rang, and Emily opened the door to find Rachel standing there. Rachel introduced herself as a friend of David's and said that he had invited her to spend time by the pool. Emily, caught off guard, hesitantly agreed to show her to the pool. As they walked outside, Rachel couldn't help but notice Emily's discomfort, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Not long after, two more women, Jessica and Megan, arrived, both stating that David had invited them over as well. They introduced themselves, explaining their connections to David. Jessica had worked with him for years, and Megan was their waitress at Grisham's. As Emily watched the three attractive women settle in by the pool, she started feeling uneasy, her mind racing with questions. The women lounged on the chairs, applying suntan lotion to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. It wasn't long before they decided that an all-over tan would be better. Each one untied their bikini tops and dropped them onto the towels beside their loungers. Emily was furious and wanted to ask them to leave, but she knew she had to be careful. David had invited them, and she was already on thin ice with him. Around 3:30 p.m., Rachel approached Emily and sat beside her. She revealed that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's and mentioned that, on the night Emily had issued the ultimatum, David had come in for a few drinks and shared everything about their situation. Emily looked startled. Rachel went on to say that she thought Emily had made a huge mistake. Rachel then told Emily that David was suspicious and had started investigating their relationship. She delivered a blunt warning. If David found out about any past or future infidelity, he planned to sleep with her, Jessica, and Megan for every instance of cheating. Emily, shocked, tried to respond, but Rachel cut her off. She added that David had also said if Emily lied about anything, he would sleep with one of them for each lie she told. Rachel made it clear that all three women found David attractive and were more than willing to be with him. Rachel, already knowing about Emily's infidelity, said she was sure David would take her up on the offer. She also hinted that Emily would likely lie to cover her tracks, leading to a busy time for David with the three women. Jessica joined them and took a seat beside Rachel, sharing that she had known David for years and always thought he was handsome and sweet. Even when he had gained weight, she still saw him as the same kind and caring man. Now that he had lost the weight, her crush on him had only intensified. She confessed that she was open to being with David whenever he wanted. Megan chimed in as well, explaining that she had been watching David and Emily for a couple of years. She had seen the love and care David had shown toward Emily, and now she had her eye on him. Her words made it clear that she, too, was interested in David and had been paying close attention to their relationship dynamics for some time. Megan acknowledged the kindness and consideration David had always shown Emily, expressing her admiration for their relationship. She admitted to feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and confessed that she had fantasized about being in Emily's position. Megan praised David's impressive weight loss of 118 pounds, recognizing how much he had done to make Emily happy, and expressed her admiration for his transformation into a hunk. She even admitted that she wished she had a man like David in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, David walked out onto the pool deck and took in the sight of Emily with the three women. He greeted Emily and casually commented on how much the women's tans had improved. Playfully, David teased the women about their beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He even encouraged Emily to join in the banter, jokingly asking why she hadn't taken off her top like the others. Feeling increasingly upset by the afternoon's events, Emily hesitated, but she reluctantly complied. David then turned to Emily, his tone shifting, and asked her two direct questions, making it clear that he expected honest answers. First, he asked her if she had ever cheated on him during their marriage. Emily immediately denied it, insisting that she had never been unfaithful. David pressed further, specifically bringing up Lucas from the gym. Emily maintained her denial, feigning confusion about how David could have gotten such an idea. Despite David's detailed questions about her meetings with Lucas, both on Wednesdays and Friday afternoons when David played golf, Emily stuck to her story, hoping he didn't have any concrete proof. Rachel, Jessica, and Megan sat nearby with knowing grins, anticipating the moment when the truth would finally come out. David then revealed the evidence he had gathered: phone logs from both their landline and Emily's cell phone. He pointed out the pattern of calls, showing how regularly she had been in contact with Lucas. To drive the point home, David had Rachel call the number, and sure enough, Lucas answered. While David didn't have photos of Emily and Lucas together, he confidently declared that the weekly calls were far from innocent. As the weight of David's knowledge sank in, Emily realized the full extent of his awareness, and she knew that their relationship was about to face a major reckoning. She tried to speak, but David cut her off, telling her that there was nothing she could say that would convince him of her innocence. Despite still loving her, David admitted that the overwhelming feelings of hurt, disgust, and anger now outweighed that love. David introduced the three women one by one, explaining their connections to him. He spoke highly of Jessica, describing her as a longtime colleague who had always been kind and sweet. He acknowledged her beauty and mentioned that he had known about her crush on him but had never acted on it out of respect for his marriage. Jessica smiled, recognizing the sincerity of their friendship. Next, David talked about Megan, saying that they had become acquainted through their visits to Grisham's, where she had served them. He revealed that Megan had fantasized about being with him and complimented her on her physical appearance, particularly her chest, expressing his intention to explore that connection. Finally, David introduced Rachel as the newest of the three women, mentioning how she had shown empathy and compassion when they spoke about his troubles at Grisham's. He highlighted how Rachel had helped him gather information, forming a strong connection with her in the process. As David spoke, Emily teetered on the verge of a breakdown. Tears streamed down her face, and her breathing grew uneven. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. David continued, acknowledging the interest that all three women had shown in him, and revealed his anticipation of exploring sensual relationships with each of them. However, he reiterated his commitment to not being unfaithful in their marriage. To pursue these new relationships, he explained, the marriage with Emily needed to end. At this point, Rachel produced divorce papers from her bag. She explained that, in addition to being a bartender, she also worked as a process server and was officially serving Emily with the divorce papers. Overwhelmed, Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She tried to apologize, pleading with David to reconsider, insisting that she still loved him. David, however, expressed his doubts about Emily's love, pointing to her actions over the last 2 years as clear evidence to the contrary. He emphasized that it wasn't just a few mistakes. He believed there had been over 100 instances of infidelity. He told Emily that the court hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, and after the legal separation was finalized, he planned to pursue relationships with the three women. David admitted that being with these women might help him come to terms with Emily's betrayal, possibly allowing him to understand the satisfaction she had sought with Lucas. He even suggested that he might find in these new relationships the love and support he had once thought he had with Emily. Turning to the three women, David said that it was time for them to leave for now, assuring them that he would be in touch with each of them individually. He then went into the house to pack a few belongings, preparing to stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Emily would move out. Emily remained by the pool, softly crying, unable to process everything that had just happened. She didn't know what more David could possibly say, but when he returned through the patio doors, suitcases in hand, it quickly became clear. David reminded Emily of the consequences he had warned her about if she cheated. As it turned out, when Emily had supposedly canceled her meeting with Lucas the day before, Lucas had already shifted his attention to the well-endowed blonde coworker he trained with every Wednesday morning from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m., the warm-up before their usual rendezvous. It seems that Rachel, Jessica, and Megan will have a similar effect on David, with the hope of transforming him into a love-making dynamo just for them. By the way, the blonde from the gym turned out to be Sofia Russo, the wife of Marco Russo. Marco didn't take kindly to Lucas's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, gave Lucas a brutal beating. Lucas's face is now a wreck, with only a few teeth left and several broken ribs. Marco even allowed David the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Lucas's groin. The result? It's unlikely Lucas will be producing any more hot seed, and there's serious doubt about whether he'll ever be able to perform in bed again. David, of course, will deny having any involvement in Lucas's fate. As luck would have it, Friday is David's golf day, and he has a solid alibi from his brother and friends. Before leaving, David wished Emily the best and told her they'd meet again in court the following Friday. That day, Emily was left alone, drowning in tears. Within the next couple of hours, she packed her bags and moved in with her mother. The divorce process dragged on for 7 months, and Emily was left utterly devastated, sinking into a deep depression. As for David, despite what he had told Emily about the other women, he had no real intention of pursuing relationships with Rachel, Jessica, or Megan. Instead, he found peace and comfort in the companionship of 2 golden retrievers, ultimately discovering what he had been searching for all along: unconditional love.